Have you ever played Jenga? You have? All right. Do you know what the biggest principle of playing Jenga? How many of you are extremely competitive and want to win everything? Thank you. All right, there's some people that we can start a support group for. All right. So here's Jenga, right? Like here are the things that are there. And the whole point of Jenga is to figure out what is holding the base, right? Like when you move something out from one place to the other, right? You still want the foundation to be good, right? Like that's the whole thing. Is every time you play it and every time you place a different piece around or move something from the down and put it up, all you're hoping for is that the foundation is in a good place, right? And this is something that we do all the time. Like when we play this past, yesterday actually, there were a bunch of kids playing, and like one kid would move it and put it up top, and then another kid would move it, and then he would move the other thing, and then the whole thing collapses and falls down in a big sigh of like, dag it, I lost. I shouldn't have pulled that piece, right? That's what Jenga is. Jenga is all about knowing not to touch the foundation, not to touch that piece that is holding everything together. So, friends, this morning, I want to share with you what is the greatest commandment. What is that one foundation thing that we cannot live without so that the whole thing collapses? That was the question that was asked to Jesus. There are over 600 laws that were written in the Old Testament, close to 600. Imagine 600 of these Jenga pieces, right? One on top of the other, one on top of the other, and on top of the other. And one guy comes up to Jesus and says, Jesus, what is the one that's holding everything together? What is that one commandment that you can't take out and the whole thing doesn't collapse? What is that one thing that we are called to hang on to no matter what? That was a simple question. Actually, it's not simple. It is pretty brilliant in terms of a question. And this is what this guy said. He was one of the teachers of the law. He's also called a scribe as well. And he came to Jesus, and this is what he asked him in Mark chapter 12, verse 29. What is the most important one? What is the one that you know that you can't touch? That you can't move it out of the place and the whole thing is going to crumble. What is that one commandment? And here, Jesus answers to him saying this. He repeats the Shema that's found in Deuteronomy chapter 6. And he tells him this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. That's it. That is one. That is the one thing that is holding everything together, is to love God with all your heart, your mind, and your soul. If you do that, you're good. And then Jesus goes on to add the second commandment. And the second is this, that's holding the whole thing together. The second is this, he says, is to love your neighbor as yourself. There is no greater commandments than these. These two, to love God and to love your neighbor, are the greatest commandments. If you pull those out, your entire faith is going to fall. If we do not live into these two commandments, our whole faith is going to fall apart, is what Jesus is saying. Then in the Gospel of Luke, somebody asks Jesus, what does it mean to love my neighbor? What does that look like? What does that look like for me to love my neighbor? Can you explain a little bit? And Jesus goes on to share this parable with him. In reply, Jesus said to this man, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho When he was attacked by robbers, they stripped him of all his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to go down the same road. When he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. And so a Levite came to that place and saw him and passed on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was. When he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine, then put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expenses you may have." And then Jesus asked this question to the scribe. He says, "Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" The scribe, or the expert in the law, or the teacher of the law, said, "The one who had mercy on him." And Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise as well." This is what it means for us to love our neighbor, is to do what the Good Samaritan did. One of the things that I want you to do right now, even before we look into this story, is I want you to stop for a minute. I know we are in church, but I'm going to ask you to do something. I want you to think about one person that gets under your skin. That one person that just gets under your skin and you can't stand this individual. Go ahead, take a minute. It might take a long time for some of us, but some of us you can picture quite easily. Right? Think about that one individual. You got one? Oh yeah, good, wonderful. This is good, right? And hear this story again. Imagine yourself being robbed. Imagine yourself being beaten, thrown aside. And the people that you look up to for help, the priest and the Levite, these individuals worked in the temple. Their whole purpose and job was to help you, was to care for your needs, for your spiritual needs, for your physical needs. They were charged. That is what they were supposed to do. And you are beaten down, you are broken, and you are thrown. You feel violated because you're robbed and you're thrown aside. I love this addition in Luke where it says he was half dead. Imagine yourself in that place. Imagine yourself in that place where you are in need of help and you are crying out, saying, "God, have mercy on me. Why did this happen to me? I was just minding my business and these guys came out of nowhere. It is not just. And they beat me up." Imagine yourself in the place of the person who threw you down. And you are there. And the 2 people that you always looked up to help walk past you. And you're there, half dead, laying on the side of the road. And the person who walks by is that person that you just thought of. The one person that got under your skin. The one person that made you angry. That one person that you're like, "Oh my gosh, I cannot take this person anymore." That person walks next to you and you are dead on the ground and you are looking up. And this person looks down at you. This person looks down at you and he extends his arm. and He picks you up, and He loves you, and He bandages your wounds, and He cares for you. And He takes you to a place where you can be cared for. Here's a question that I would like us to consider. Would you be willing to lift your hand up and say, sure, help me? To that individual that drives you, that gets under your skin. Because the Samaritans were the most hated people in all of Israel. They were the most hated individuals. They were the ones that you did not like. You told your kids not to hang out with those Samaritans. Would you? Would you lift your hand and say, sure, help me? Because if you don't help me, I'm going to die. Would you? That's a question for us to wrestle with. And here is where it flips on it. Would you be willing to show love and compassion and mercy if the person that gets under your skin is beaten and thrown aside half dead? That is what Jesus is asking us to do today. It sounds simple. To love your neighbor as yourself. Who is your neighbor? It's easy to love those who love us. It's easy to be kind to those who are kind to us. It is easy to be civil with those who are in our inner circle. But it's so hard to love the other. It is so hard to love the one that is beaten down and broken, left half dead, and that person gets under our skin. See, the story is this. As much as Jews hated the Samaritans didn't love the Jews anymore either. So are you? This is the heart of the gospel. Are you willing to love your neighbor? Because that's it, right? That's it. That's where the whole gospel rests on. You can move everything else, but the minute you move this one piece, the whole thing collapses. It's to love God and to love your neighbor. That's what we are called to do. Are you willing to love your neighbor? Are you willing to love the one that gets under your skin, that you told your kids not to play with them? Are you willing to do that? Because if we can't do that, then the whole thing falls apart. That is the story of what it means to love our neighbor. And then Jesus goes on to two other things, and Jesus tells these two other stories. One, I think it actually is building on this story of what it means for us to actually follow Jesus, what it means for us to be a disciple of Jesus. He tells two different stories that go from there. As he taught, Jesus said to them, "Watch out for the teachers of the law, the scribes, the ones that know the law really well, that have memorized the Old Testament." This is what he said to them. As he taught, Jesus said, "Watch out for the teachers of the law. They live and walk around in flowing robes and greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and have the most important seats in the synagogue and in the places of honor of banquets. They devour widows, and for a show, they make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished severely." Here, Jesus is telling us what it means. He's kind of telling another Jenga piece of like what it means for us not to be like those people. Here, the scribes and the teachers of the law lived in a culture where respect and honor was really important, where you were seated was really important. It was a culture where you were seated kind of spoke about your own value. And these scribes, they made it about themselves. They made it all about them. And they wore beautiful garments just so that everybody would know that they were the scribes. They wanted everyone to recognize them as the leaders of the synagogue. They held important seats. It was important to them where they sat and how people greeted them. It was important for them when they made lengthy prayers, because they were not praying, they were talking more. They wanted everyone to know, look at me, how great I am. And Jesus is saying, look out. That's not what it means to be a disciple, because it's never about you. It's never about saying, put the spotlight on me, look how great I am. It's never about that. That is the gospel. Jesus is calling us to not do what the Pharisees and the scribes were doing. He's saying we got to live differently. We got to live in humility. We got to live in a way where we are caring and loving those who are beaten down and thrown down, and not necessarily be bothered about what we wear and the places of our honor. How many times have I thought more about me than those around me this week? Is a question that I ponder as I read this scripture. And then Jesus moves to another story. He moves to a story talking about this pompous individuals who were all about themselves. And then he moves to a widow. A widow in this culture was the one who lived on the margins. There's a whole series about literature about widows, because widows, the minute you became a widow, that meant that you didn't have any possessions. You didn't have any real estate. You couldn't own anything. You lived on the mercy either of your children, and if you didn't have any children, you lived on the mercy of those around you. This is the story. And Jesus sat down opposite to the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but the poor widow came with 2 very small copper coins, only worth a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, I truly tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They gave all out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on. When you read this story for the first time, you have to wonder, how does Jesus know that this poor widow only put 2 and the others put a lot more money? Right? How did he know? Is Jesus, we know, is all-knowing? Did he just imagine how he knew? He just had foreknowledge of that? No, it's not that. See, it says that Jesus was sitting across from where the offering was placed. The way the offering was placed is in the temple was, if you can imagine, a huge trumpet, right? Like a big bass, and that would just turn around into a small opening. And this was made of metal. And the currency of this day was mostly coins, right? When people came and dropped their offering, it made a noise. They would come and they would put some in. Somebody had 10 coins or 20 coins. It made a lot of noise. So there were all these individuals coming and dropping money into the treasury, and there was a noise. Everyone knew what everyone gave. But this widow, she walks in with 2 cents and drops it. Tung, tung. No noise. I'm sure everybody around the widow looked at her and said, "What? That's all you got? That's all you're giving? Look at this other guy. He gave a lot more." And this is what Jesus said to his disciples. Calling his disciples, he said, "I truly tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all others. They gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything she had to live on." I think Mark is putting this story in this context here is to remind us what this poor widow was doing. This poor widow knew what it means to love God with all her heart, mind, and soul. She wasn't concerned about anything else. She gave because she loved her God with all her heart, mind, and soul. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Love your Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. That is what this widow did. That is the power of the widow's might. She knew what it means to love God, while the others just gave out of, maybe I should. Maybe I will. I don't know. I'm not sure about it. But this widow gave because she knew what it means to love God with all her heart, mind, and soul. Friends, this morning, this is the greatest commandment. This is the Jenga that is holding everything together in order for us to follow Christ. We are called to love God with all our heart, mind, and soul. And we are called to love our neighbor. May you ponder the teachings of Jesus, so that Jesus can look at you and say this. When Jesus saw the man that answered wisely, he said to him, "You're not far from the kingdom of God." So that Jesus can look at you kindly and say, "You get it. You get what it means to follow me." Amen.